You do it. Make your dreams come true. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Just do it.
I'm so delighted to be at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Every year, it seems like it gets better. The leadership of the Aspen Institute has done a wonderful job helping all of really the country and the world to understand the power of ideas. You know, when we're in a world that's buffeted by the constant weather of politics, it's very important to remember that more important than the weather of politics is the climate of ideas. I learned once from a physicist that the biggest mistake you can make as a PhD physicist is mistaking the climate for the weather. The Aspen Ideas Festival doesn't do that. Congratulations on participating in it, and thank you for being here at this session, which I've been so excited about because I get to talk to my friend Simon Sinek. If you're here, it's because you know who Simon Sinek is. He's a best-selling author. He's a consultant to some of the most important organizations in the world, and he's an all-around purveyor of the ideas that can lift people up. He's a humanist. He was born in the UK, and he's lived in South Africa and Hong Kong, and most exotically in New Jersey. He attended Brandeis University and the City University of London. He got his start in the world of marketing and advertising. He had his own firm, Sinek Partners, and his understanding of leadership comes from his own mixed experiences leading that firm. That's not how you know him, however. Many of you became familiar with Simon Sinek all suddenly in 2009, where he had his breakout moment. Now, actually, nobody has a breakout moment. When you look at a rock band that suddenly breaks out on the scene, it turns out that they've been touring for 16 years before that. But everybody learned about them because they became very viral for whatever reasons. That happened to Simon in 2009 when he had a TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action, which is the third most watched TED Talk of all time, with 32 million views. And it was aligned with his first best-selling book, Start With Why. We're going to talk about that here in a second. Since then, he's had more bestsellers, of course. Leaders Eat Last, Why Some Teams Pull Together and Others Don't, which I recommend very highly to you for your interest. You won't be disappointed. And in 2016, Together is Better, a little book of inspiration. His next book, which is coming out in September, is Find Your Why, which talks about start with why, but how to do it, which is really important. And we're going to talk a little bit later about a very exciting new project that he's working on. It's in beta form, and I can't wait to learn more about it, and I can't wait for you to learn more about it too. We're going to take a few minutes and have a conversation. I'm going to ask him some questions. We're going to discuss issues around leadership that the country needs, that the world needs, that business needs, that families need, that we all need. And then you get to interview him after that in the back half of this hour. So welcome, Simon Sinek.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks. When Aspen invited me to come and do this, they said, who would you like to interview you? And they gave me sort of a list of all these famous journalists and things. I said, no, I want Arthur Brooks, because he's the best. And I get to hang out here with my friend.
That's great. Thank you, really, Simon. The last time we were together was under really funny circumstances when many of you saw in the news right after the election in January, the Republicans, all the House Republicans and Senate Republicans went on retreat to Philadelphia, and this closed retreat. And I looked at the keynote speakers on this retreat, and it was Donald Trump and Vice President Pence and Simon Sinek and me, which was really, really great. But we got a little bit of time to hang out together and maybe cook up some things that we want to talk about today. And here's my first question. We have a crisis in leadership in this country, and people in this audience who are really politically mixed and ideologically mixed have different ways of describing that crisis, but there's nobody in here who thinks that leadership is the best it's been for our country politically or in business today. Describe the leadership crisis, how we got here, and then I'm going to ask you a little bit about where we can go.
Sure. The leadership crisis has nothing to do with the presidency. I think we've had a leadership crisis for quite some time, and it's been steadily getting worse over the past 20 or 30 years. And it's primarily due to the fact that we misunderstand what leadership is, and the strategies and the ways we're building our organizations are based on the false definition of leadership. Let me give you an example. So in business, for example, too many of our standard business philosophies today, the way we normally run businesses, are leftovers from philosophies and ideas that were introduced in the 80s and 90s. So, for example, the concept of shareholder supremacy was a theory proposed in the late 1970s, popularized in the 80s and 90s, and is now the standard way of doing business. Remember, the 80s and 90s were boom years, relative peace in the world, a kinder and gentler Cold War, and so a lot of the ideas that we were generating on how to lead and how to build our businesses were based on those conditions. In other words, when boom years are there, we sort of become a little more selfish, right? So shareholder supremacy was a theory proposed back then, popularized in the 80s and 90s. Now it's standard way of doing business and arguably hasn't been a successful experiment. Every CEO of every public company, it's a big open secret, hates the analyst community, hates Wall Street, yet they play the game. The concept of using mass layoffs to balance the books, which is now standard practice in so many large businesses, public and private, that we don't even recognize how destructive it is to the human spirit and to the culture of an organization, did not exist in the United States prior to the 1980s. Did not exist. But it was popularized in the 80s and 90s and now has become normal. And so you see a lot of those sort of me first and putting the organization before the people, or numbers before people, really in government policy and in business that are now standard today. These are very, very different times, and I think that leadership hasn't kept up with the times. The organizations that understand prioritizing human beings, the life of a human being over the abstraction of a number, are the ones that outperform, out-innovate, by the way, have no millennial problems,